Hi, Charlie. Welcome. Good to have you.
Hey, it's so good to be here, Walter.
Charlie Peck is a fabulous presenter, and she walks it like she talks it. She lives wellness for educators and their students. And I've had the honor of seeing her present for us in Columbus, Ohio, Monmouth, New Jersey, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and now coming up the end of September in Cincinnati in her backyard.
I
So,
cannot
Charlie,
wait. Yeah,
it's
it's
going to
great.
be awesome.
Yeah.
So I want everyone to get to know you. Talk to us about this work, the passion, and how you got into it, and why it's so important to you.
Well, I've been in education for over 20 years, Walter, and I did spend 18 years teaching high school. So I got to work with adolescents and who are transitioning actually into high school. And then I got to work with teenage students, right? The adolescents who are in front of me all the time. And because of my curriculum, we got to talk about brain development. We got to talk about personal and family relationships, challenges in society, and issues that were just plaguing us. And so when that happened, my teenage students started talking with me about their issues, right? And so I just realized they were struggling so much. I didn't understand it because so many of us who cared about them were surrounding them all the time, but they were really struggling. So there's a long journey behind that, but I will speed you up. I decided to get my Master of Social Work so I could understand the structural issues going on with them and society that was contributing to them. And so that led me into being a clinical therapist. I worked in residential treatment. I worked at a hospital with really struggling teens and their families. And now I'm working as a therapist in middle schools, telehealth, but also in person. But what I get to do is this work full time, traveling across the country, sharing ideas and what I've learned to help educators do their work better so that they feel fulfilled, but also to support their students better.
And you wrote a book along the way.
I
Tell us a
did
little
write
about
a
the
book
book.
along the way. Yes,
Yeah.
I teamed up with Dr. Cameron Caswell. She's an adolescent psychologist,
Yes.
and we created a framework. I mean, that's what these schools and organizations need. They need a framework, and that's exactly what we gave them. It's about integrating skills into everyday practice. So it's not one more thing to do, it integrates easily and seamlessly into what they're already doing to provide that relief.
And I can honestly say, as someone who's watched you present, that your ideas are so practical and so helpful. You actually have us sitting in the audience doing things and practicing things that we can take right back to our schools and make happen. So just to let everybody know, this is really practical, authentic stuff.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Walter, because it has to be. If we're going to remember to use it, it has to be.
Amen. The pandemic. I mean, we were all kind of cranking along and no one saw it coming. How did that hit schools and what did you see and what do you think we're learning from that?
We definitely learned that we need more mental health supports. Like that's obvious. We knew that before, but not a lot of people were taking action. And then the funding came along to say, oh my gosh, there is information here we need in schools. And so when the government got behind it, and then the US Surgeon General said, listen, we have a loneliness epidemic going on in our country too. And now we have COVID and there's a lot more anxiety, a lot more stress. We have to pay attention. So it actually opened up the door for me to come in and work with kids and their families and educators. Educators need it too. They are so stressed in our system.
And that's such a big message that you send that there's educator wellness and there's student wellness. And certainly they're connected, but then they're also very separate. And we need to make time for ourselves as educators. Can you talk a little about that? How we're such service-oriented people. How should we be thinking about that to take care of ourselves?
Well, that's such a great question because what the leaders we work with are worried about is saying, oh my gosh, if you tell educators that they need to take more time for themselves, they're actually going to just step out and quit or give up altogether. They're not going to be here. And we say that's actually not true. What they're asking for, and you know this, what they're asking for is actually more skills so that they can manage their overwhelm and actually not get there in the first place, so that they can build those relationships they know they need to do with kids that will support them better. And all of a sudden, their classroom culture, their classroom environment becomes a safe, secure space, and everybody wants to be together. That's really what this boils down to. It's not about doing more, and it's not about stepping out to take care of myself because I can't handle it. It's how do I function better within this role that will be challenging, but how do I enjoy it and get just more joy out of my life altogether?
And you hit the nail on the head because your framework and your strategies are exactly what we need as educators. We don't have that. We don't have that frame of reference to say, how do I stop with everything I've got going on to think about this and have implementable strategies I can use to take care of myself?
Yes, because I remember being an educator sitting in a professional development session, Walter, and rolling my eyes because I had mental health professionals trying to talk with me without any kind of teacher lens. They had no idea what the classroom experience was like, right? And so I knew that when I became a therapist and I was working with people individually and in group sessions, teaching them these practical, tangible skills that help them function better, I thought, why in the world are we not teaching this to educators? And I knew that I could speak to them at their level and use their same kind of language and experiences to help them integrate those skills. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I love it. It is practical because they won't do it otherwise. So it has to be so easy to remember and do. That's the approach.
And it totally shows when you're working with an audience, you love your work and you connect immediately with the people in the room. And for a lot of us, it's almost an aha just being able to work with you because we all know wellness is important, but to actually talk to someone with your background and expertise and insights, it's like a wake-up call. It's like, oh, here's some things we can actually do. Here's some ways to think about it that I hadn't even had the time to think about. So a big shout out to when you get the chance, working with Charlie Peck is truly going to help you as a professional moving forward. Now, it's such a rush presenting. When you get to work with educators in person, there's nothing like it. So talk a little about that. What's your mindset going into a presentation? What do you love about presenting to audiences, educators in particular? And do you have any particular favorite memories of faculty that you've worked with?
I always take something away every single time. I learn something from the audience every time. That sounds so cliche, but it is absolutely true. And I will tell you, I will start with my favorite because I bombed. Probably not as much as it seems to outsiders, but to me it does. I tried to teach all 9 skills. So our framework includes 9 skills. There's a rationale for all of them. And they actually do get broken down. But I tried to teach all of them in one day to 50 principals
Wow.
in one area. And I walked away and they did get some of the ideas and they liked it. We're in touch still. But it wasn't the way that it needed to be done. So my favorite thing to do is use scenarios that everybody can relate to and apply. So if I'm working with elementary teachers, we'll use an elementary experience. The good news is all of these tools and skills, they do relate to any age group. In fact, I do a lot of higher ed now as well, and prepare teachers before they go into the classroom. How about
Yes.
that? So
Hey,
one of Right. And so one of my favorite experiences is just that, is working with these new fresh teachers who, when they go to their placements, they're seeing burned out teachers and they're talking about it. Those host teachers are talking about it to these new teachers. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
yeah.
We have got to protect them. And so giving them tools ahead of time, which I think every higher ed facility needs this new curriculum. But it's about preparing them so they go in knowing how to maintain their energy instead of losing it and feeling depleted all the time. That's my favorite. But also when I get to spend time, like one of my last events I got to do, I did the opening keynote and then I did 4 sessions and they were deep dives. They were all about the skill and application. And then I got to close the event. So it was a whole day. It was just an immersive experience. I loved it.
That's fabulous.
It
Yeah, higher ed is so key. And like we talk about it as educators, just in terms of teacher prep and the next generation of in the profession. What do you see as their needs, both while they're at university, but then coming out? Certainly hearing for the voices of experience and being able to keep fresh perspective is one need. But what do young people coming into the profession really need today to be prepared?
Mhm. It's to mitigate that inner voice they have. And the reason I say that is so many people are riddled with anxiety, and it comes from all of those internal and external influences they've had growing up, and they've kind of attached it to their inner being. And so there's all of these expectations. And so if we can't manage that inner voice and change some of the language we're using, we are going to be overwhelmed. So I believe that if we just shift that, that is a great strategy. And it brings us more ownership, more power instead of handing it over. And so that way, when that student in front of me starts to act out, how I respond has nothing to do with them. So I'm confident about me showing up every single day in front of every single student.
That's a fabulous insight, and certainly to feel like you do have some control and some power, so that you can grow and with that self-awareness be successful.
That's
I was
right.
talking to someone yesterday, who's actually in HR in public education, and they were saying, so many of us, we just aren't self-aware enough to even realize how we're engaging people depending on the day and the mood and the stress. And so what you're talking about is so on point for what we're all living in education.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if everybody in the system was doing that and intentionally trying to just have good intentions. I mean, there's
Yeah,
so much more to that, but yes.
absolutely. And honestly, when you heard Charlie talk, when you're in her session, you really can do a deep dive because the insights you bring and the perspectives and perceptions just enrich our thinking on this whole topic. It's an amazing experience. Um, the Worthy Educator is a home for mid to late career educators. And so when you're talking to us veterans and we're sitting there looking at you and all of the opportunities and challenges that educators face every day, what do you see and what do you say for them so that they know, even though they may be putting in their 30th or 40th year and they've seen it all and they've done it all and they've seen every wagon train right into town and right out of town. Oh, what do you say to them to help them have some of that centeredness and self-awareness and an ability to course correct for their own self-care and wellness?
Hmm. That I love working with this population. I actually get a ton of feedback about them shifting their perspective,
Yeah,
and you wouldn't expect it. One of the things I always start with is the language. So those buzzwords that we hear in education, if you
yeah,
say those over and over, they shut right down. Those words lose their luster so quickly. And my specialization is in trauma, and I rarely use the word trauma. I'll say it sometimes, but they're so sick of hearing that. They're so sick of hearing all these other words that when they either don't understand how powerful they are or they're just sick of hearing it because why they're stuck is because they're in a system that seems to be doing the same things over and over again without any difference. And they know that change needs to occur, so they get kind of stuck in it and they get negative. And by the way, we're negative creatures in the beginning here. Like
right.
that's where our brain goes. So if I just tell them, yeah, you're going to think that way, and here's how you can shift out of it, go
Yes.
ahead if you want a different outcome, or go ahead and keep doing what you're doing if it's working for you. Because for them, I don't want to impose anything on them. I want them to think about how that shift, if they make it, how it will impact the rest of their career on the way out. And there's a little bit more to it, but that's where I start.
That's right where they live. I mean, that's so appropriate. You mentioned trauma, um, and that is such a hot topic in the public discourse about wellness. Um, but given your expertise in the profession, how much is trauma the root of so many things that we struggle with as we try to cope and compensate for traumas that we've experienced?
A lot. It is a lot because it's unprocessed. Now, if we if we come into the system and we have processed the trauma, it's we're usually functioning okay.
Yeah,
Right. But there are so many of us, and a lot of those people are adults who didn't talk about this before, who didn't know that you can actually go and process trauma with a trauma specific therapist. I mean, it actually doesn't take that long depending on the complexities, but there's a way to do that in a way that you're not emotionally charged. What people don't realize is that they're holding on to that neurological, like it's so physical. It's so physical.
yes,
And it creates that emotional charge through our nervous system. And if we could just understand that it's about feeling that charge, knowing it's there, and then now you can shift out of it. And there are ways to do that. Instead of hearing that word, just cope with it or calm down or
right.
just breathe. People are so sick of hearing that. So offering different solutions to that and giving them perspective helps. But it really is about that because nobody wants to climb that ladder of conflict. Nobody wants to stay emotionally charged. It's just simply not healthy. And we
No,
don't, we don't, we don't engage the way we want to in a way that we don't regret later, right? We will say things or do things that we're like, oh, dang, I wish I didn't do that. So if we
exactly.
can have a little bit more control over that, we can absolutely function better.
It's so true. And absolutely, when you need to process trauma, working with a therapist and doing the work is the key. But on a day-to-day basis, when you're working in your building with your faculty, we can help each other simply by the way we interact with each other. We may not know what trauma someone else has been through or what they're going through currently. And a lot of the strategies that we can help out on a daily basis with our colleagues is that awareness on how we treat each other, right?
Right.
It,
Right.
it
And
just
yeah, too, Walter, it's so important you said that it's it doesn't always have to even be trauma. I mean, and trauma isn't an excuse for behavior anyway, but it doesn't always even have to be that. It could be stress. I mean, stress and trauma are not exactly the same, right? It can
no.
lead to one or the other, or trauma can lead to some stressful behaviors and the mindset and the charge and all of that. There's more to it. But if we talk in terms of stress, first of all, that's nobody politicizes the word stress. Everybody listens to the word stress. Everybody can get behind that. So if we one of the things I do is I teach about, well, what does stress look like in the brain and body? What's the connection? And then by the way, what can I do about it? The problem is take trauma out of the picture for a second. We when we feel stress, we are overloaded. So we get these stress hormones that flood our brains, it floods our bodies. We're charged, right? And so if that never recedes, if that doesn't go away, then we're all walking around charged, right? We're walking around flooded with these stress hormones. Not everybody and not all the time, but there's more of that happening in our environment that is filled with a lot of busy things and a lot of have tos. So that's part of what's going on too. It's just we're not kind of relaxing and finding that spot to start in again.
And it's exhausting. It's just
Yes.
if that's going on internally, regardless of what's going on around you, it's exhausting.
Yes. And that's physiological. There's a reason for that. It literally is a physiological response. And then add those that inner voice that we have that we're hard on ourselves about or that we haven't mitigated since childhood or we keep hearing and then that we bring that into our professional life and then we hear a kid that triggers us and that's another buzzword I don't actually use that much but reminds us that we don't like that it makes us uncomfortable.
And it is amazing. And I can say this hindsight is great. As I've worked over the years and kind of followed threads back, things go all the way back to childhood, go all the way back to the messages your parents give you, go all
Yeah.
the way back to your relationships with your siblings. And until you process and understand how maybe they've affected you over the years or how that's filtered things for you, you don't have the power you could have over the decisions you make and the success you have. So the work you're doing is just so powerful.
Thank you. It's important. I've learned it's important so I want to spread it to the masses.
And you're doing a fabulous job.
Thanks.
So we'd like to take a few minutes just to let you to talk to the audience and do a sample of how you present and on topic of your choice. And I'm just going to sit back and enjoy. So please share the magic that is Charlie Peck.
Okay, well, I will share something that I love to start out with, especially uh, in leadership sessions, but also when educators are sitting around and they really want to talk about the chaos in the education system with regards to mental health. And so what we start with is why aren't current solutions actually working? And so some of those solutions are let's pay staff more. Let's just pay staff more, or let's just add more therapists, or let's have every school trauma informed. And there's a whole list here that the NEA suggests to us. But if we look at each one of those, they each have a flaw. And so the current solutions that we're trying to do to mitigate that chaos in the education system with regards to mental health or that crisis we're all feeling like we're in, it's because of these three things that seem to keep coming up. First of all, we all have these piecemeal programs that don't interlock. They're not woven together well to create a full solution. And so we're doing things in these pieces that don't feel like they're going to ever be finished, right? And so the other part of that problem is that we have overwhelmed staff. Our staff have so much to do, and they constantly feel like there's more on their plate, and they're just not able to keep up with it. Add student behaviors in there, and they just don't have the tools to respond effectively. And so they're overwhelmed. And the third part of the problem is that we're in a constant reactive state of triage. We have this great graphic that we show where people are either falling over the edge into water, and the other part of that, well, people are already in the water and they are just drowning. And sometimes that's us. Sometimes we feel like that's who we are. And it depends on the time of year. If you ask like in August or September, usually you're not in that water drowning yet. But when I talk with you in sometimes October and many times in April, you better believe a lot of people feel like they're drowning in that chaos and crisis of mental health. And then sometimes we have onlookers who are constantly trying to solve the problem, constantly looking for a solution, and they're pulling those people out of the water, but they don't know if they're making any kind of headway, and they certainly don't know where to start. And so that graphic is important because we need to know where we are in order to know where we want to go. That is all reactive. And I can tell you, being reactive is not where we want to be. We're just not functioning well when we're constantly reactive and we're flooded with that stress hormones and with the stress hormones. And we don't want to be there either. So what is the solution? Well, we have a three-part solution. It has to be simplified, it has to be integrative, and it has to be preventative. And so we have these 9 essential skills that we draw upon, and it addresses certain complex problems. But what we've done is we've organized them in ways to first manage our own mental health and wellness, our own self needs. So that is sometimes understanding that we need to start with our strengths. If we're really hard on ourselves and we feel like we're not doing well in the system, then we can step back and say, listen, this is what I am doing well. And how can I start here? And that's what we would do therapeutically. So why aren't we providing these tools and skills and language to people in the system of chaos already? That's where we're coming from. The other piece to that is knowing when we're in what's called a story spiral. So a story spiral is kind of the narrative that we're telling ourselves, but let me tell you this, it's typically based on a lie. So one of the things that we do is we have you think about walking down the hall and there's a colleague that you know pretty well coming the other way and you say, "Hey, how you doing?" And the other colleague doesn't even look at you. I mean, they don't even look up and acknowledge you at all. And so what do you immediately think? You make it about yourself. You do that because you're human, you have an ego, right? So we always think it's about us. That person walking down the hall, of course, was in their own head about something that had to do nothing with you, nothing. But yet we've just told ourselves that, oh my gosh, I did something wrong, or oh my goodness, they're mad at me, or they think something negatively about me. What did I do? And there's more to this, but ultimately we go into this story spiral, which starts with a thought often that affects how we feel, which affects how we react. And then that reaction causes other people to respond to us in a certain way and sometimes react to us as well. So now we're spiraling out of control. And what we say is this: how many story spirals are you walking around with all day long? It's usually more than one. And sometimes even that one is carried home with you later. And then all of a sudden we're reactive at home. And that is supposed to be our safe space to just relax and unwind. And all of a sudden we've created a little bit more chaos there, or we're walking into it. So these are some thoughts that we need to have. We need to, in that chaotic system, think about how we're going to simplify the solutions. And that's what the 9 skills are that I would go into sessions and teach you how to apply them. And we will look at scenarios that make sense to you and see when they'll work and how they'll work. But they've got to integrate into everyday practice. So you've got to be able to remember them. So when you walk out of sessions, especially like here right now, you will walk away knowing what to do. You will walk away knowing that when you're in a story spiral, this is how you think and feel and how to pull yourself out of it. And ultimately, when we are skilled with how to manage ourselves and then how to step outside of ourselves and respond more effectively to kids, especially in our space that we're sharing and setting up for them, or for leaders, how to share that space and engage in a way that's collaborative, then we are able to feel confident and love the work that we're doing. And ultimately, this prevents those behaviors from arising in the first place. But when they do, because they will, then we feel skilled and we feel equipped to respond more effectively. So the next piece of this is I would go into workshop mode and I would actually give you some tangible skills and tools. I might throw in some rapid resets, which are really fun things to do under a minute that can just shift the energy in the room.
It's powerful stuff. And just sharing it here on Zoom, I know viewers get that sense of exhilaration because you bring such passion to what you're talking about. Charlie is going to be with us in Cincinnati at our Reese Price Academy on Saturday, September 28th. So if you're able to make it to Cincinnati, you get to work with her there in person. In addition, she's a member of our Speakers Bureau. And so you can reach out and we can talk about how you can work exclusively with Charle in your school, with your faculty, with your organization to make a difference in your workplace and in everybody's lives. Charle, this is just fantastic. Any final parting words, anything you'd like to add?
I just want everyone to understand that there is hope. I mean, there is hope for our education system. I don't want anybody wanting to step out of it because we can absolutely thrive within it. I'm excited about that. I really am.
The thriving educator. That's what it's all about.
It is.
All right. Charle, thank you very much. Looking forward to great things ahead. And everyone, be sure to contact Charle. Looking forward to working with you and your staff.
Thank you so much, everybody.